My name is Mara Whitcomb, and I was 37 years old the morning. My mother put both hands on my shoulders and asked me to confess to a crime my sister committed. Not asked. That is too gentle a word. The confession was already printed. It sat on the kitchen island between a black pen with the cap removed and a mug of coffee Nolan Pierce had not bothered to finish. My father stood by the sink in his Sunday sweater, reading glasses low on his nose, as if this were a bill he had already decided not to pay. My sister Lacey sat near the pantry in yesterday's campaign blouse, her hair pulled back, her eyes swollen, but not from worrying about the man in the hospital. Arthur Bell was 72 years old. He had been walking home from the public library when my SUV hit him on County Road 18 and left him there in the dark. By sunrise, he was in surgery with a shattered pelvis, 3 cracked ribs, and a head wound the news anchor described in the careful voice people use when they do not want to say dying. Lacey had been driving. Everyone in that kitchen knew it. My mother squeezed my shoulders like she used to when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. "Just say you were confused, sweetheart," she said. "Families survive by protecting each other." My father did not look ashamed. He looked practical. "Lacey has a future in this town," he said. "You have a job nobody here understands." Nolan Pierce slid the paper closer to me. "It's a corrective statement," he said. "Not a confession." But my name was typed at the bottom. My words were already chosen. And what none of them knew was that the daughter they still called a paperwork girl had spent the last 9 years prosecuting people who thought truth was something they could edit before lunch. Before we begin, please subscribe to support the channel. And here is a fun little challenge. Check your phone battery right now. If it is above 44%, comment 1. If it is below 44%, comment 2. Let's see which answer wins today. If you enjoy this story and would like to support our team, you can buy us a cup of coffee through the link in the description. Every contribution helps us continue creating more meaningful, emotional, and captivating stories for you. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. Now, let's begin the story. To understand why they believed I would sign that paper, I have to go back 2 days, to the Friday I drove 9 hours from Denver to Briar Glen, Iowa. My sister's text had come in at 7:18 that morning. "Mom wants the whole family picture this time. Don't make it weird." There was no please. No "we miss you." Just an instruction with enough polish on it to pass for an invitation. My parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and the Whitcomb house looked exactly the way I remembered it. White siding, green shutters, a brass eagle over the front door, a porch too wide for people who had never learned how to sit still. My mother changed the wreath 4 times a year, as if keeping the front door pretty could prove everything inside the house was fine. Belinda opened the door wearing pearls and a cream cardigan. She hugged me with one arm because the other was holding a stack of linen napkins. "You made it," she said, in the tone people use when a package arrives late but still usable. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish, baked ham, and the kind of money my father liked people to think we had. Lacey's campaign signs leaned against the hall closet. Blue and silver. Lacey Whitcomb for Briar Glen City Council. Underneath, in smaller letters, "Lacey listens." The slogan was funny in a house where Lacey had never had to listen to anyone who said no. Still, everyone treated those signs like sacred objects, stepping around them carefully, as if one bent corner could damage the family future. On the wall beside the dining room was the family photo gallery. I stopped in front of it longer than I meant to. Lacey at graduation. Lacey cutting a ribbon. Lacey with the mayor. Lacey in a navy dress shaking hands with the governor's wife. I was there too. 9 times. The newest photo of me was 12 years old, taken the summer I turned 25. After that, the wall kept going without me. Nobody had removed me. That would have required intention. This was worse. They had simply stopped needing new proof that I existed. In my mother's house, being missing from the wall was not an accident. It was a verdict delivered quietly, frame by frame. My father found me by the dining room arch and brought over Glenn Hargrove, a man who owned half the grain elevators in 3 counties. "This is our oldest, Mara," Conrad said. She handles paperwork for the government out in Colorado. Glenn gave me the polite smile people give women they have already categorized. I shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him. I let it stand. Near the front door, my mother had placed her silver key tray on the table beneath the mirror. Same rule as always. Everyone dropped their keys there when they came in. Belinda called it safety. My father called it order. I called it inventory, but only in my head. At 6:12 p.m., I placed my SUV key between Conrad's truck fob and Lacey's white leather keychain. My mother watched it land. She always watched small things. I did not know then that by Sunday morning, the same people who watched me drop that key would swear they could not remember who had touched it. By 7:30, the dining room had filled with people who believed they were important because my father had told them they were. County donors, church friends, 2 retired bankers, Glenn Hargrove and his wife, who wore diamonds to eat ham off my mother's wedding china. Everyone kept congratulating Conrad and Belinda on 40 years of marriage, as if staying in the same house always meant people had been kind inside it. Lacey moved through the room like she had been rehearsing for it since childhood. She touched elbows, remembered grandchildren's names, and laughed with her head tilted just enough for the camera. By then she had a glass of white wine in her hand. Not her first. Not her last. Nolan Pierce stood near the fireplace, watching her the way a man watches a stock he bought early and expects to triple. When my father tapped his knife against his glass, the room went quiet immediately. That was one of Conrad Whitcomb's talents. He did not raise his voice. He made silence feel like something people owed him. He started with the anniversary, with my mother's patience, with the dealership he had built from 2 tractors and a handshake. Then his eyes went to Lacey, and the speech changed shape. "Our family has always believed in service," he said, "and now Lacey is carrying that forward." She stood beside him in her navy dress, the blue and silver campaign bracelet bright on her wrist. People clapped before he even finished. My mother dabbed the corner of one eye with a napkin. Nolan smiled like a man seeing his invoice pay itself. Then Glenn Hargrove turned toward me and asked, "And what do you do out in Denver, Mara?" I opened my mouth. My father answered for me. "Mara keeps the government organized," he said with a small laugh. "Every family needs one practical child." It was not cruel enough for anyone to object. That was the trick. It landed softly, wrapped in humor, and everyone in the room knew how to receive it. A few people smiled. Someone chuckled near the sideboard. Lacey took a sip of wine and added, "She's always been good at staying out of the spotlight." My mother's hand found my wrist under the table and squeezed once. Not comfort, warning. I looked at her fingers, then at the wall of photographs behind her, where my life had stopped at 25. I could have corrected them. I could have said the title out loud and watched the room rearrange itself around me. But I had spent too many years mistaking silence for peace, and that night I was still trying to get through one family dinner without bleeding on the table. So I smiled. Nolan lifted his glass toward Lacey and said, "Briar Glen deserves leaders with clean judgment and clean records." The room clapped again. Lacey raised her glass with them, the bracelet flashing under the chandelier, and I remember thinking that clean judgment was a strange thing to toast with someone who had been drinking since 6. What I did not know was that before the night was over, that bracelet would become the one thing Lacey could not smile her way out of. The party ended the way those things always ended in my parents' house, with compliments repeated at the door, foil, covered leftovers pressed into hands, and my mother standing in the foyer counting what had been returned. Serving spoons, wine glasses, coats, people. She had a gift for making hospitality feel like a closing procedure, and by the time the last guest stepped onto the porch, the house already felt less like a home than a room being reset. By 11, most of the guests were gone. The important ones had stayed longer than the kind ones. Nolan lingered near the fireplace with my father, talking low about Monday calls and donor follow-ups. Lacey was still bright in that way people get when the wine has not made them sleepy yet. She laughed at something Glenn Hargrove said, one hand on the back of a chair, her campaign bracelet loose around her wrist. I said goodnight a little after 11:15. Nobody asked me to stay downstairs. Nobody asked if I needed anything. My old room was the second door on the left, the one that had stopped being mine years ago without anyone announcing it. The narrow bed was still there, but the closet belonged to my mother's winter coats, and 3 plastic tubs of Christmas garland sat where my desk used to be. I changed into a sweatshirt and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the house settle into its private voice. Pipes in the wall, cabinet hinges. A burst of laughter from downstairs, then my father's low reply. Around 11:30, I heard the front door close for the last time, and then a stretch of quiet that should have meant the night was over. It did not. At 11:42, I heard the silver tray in the foyer shift. It was a flat, delicate sound, metal against wood, followed by the soft clink of keys. I remember looking up from the book in my lap, not because the sound was loud, but because I knew that tray. My mother could hear someone touch it from 2 rooms away. In that house, keys were not just keys. They were permission. A few seconds later, the side door opened. Then the garage door rose, humming through the floorboards. I waited for my father's truck to start, or my mother's sedan, or the old freezer in the garage to kick on and explain everything. Instead, an engine turned over once, low and uneven the way mine always did on cold nights. Mine. I crossed to the window, but from that side of the house, I could only see the maple tree and the black line of the driveway beyond it. Headlights moved once across the branches, then disappeared. I told myself there were reasons. Maybe Conrad needed to move cars around. Maybe Lacey had left something in the event hall. Maybe I was still annoyed from dinner and turning small things into injuries. That is one of the quiet damages of being dismissed for years. Eventually, you start helping them do it. I went back to the bed. I read the same paragraph 4 times and understood none of it. At 12:09, the garage door opened again. This time there were voices in the kitchen. Low. Fast. Not arguing exactly. Arranging. A woman was crying in short, broken breaths. Then my mother's voice cut through, sharp in a way I had not heard all night. Don't say that word. Not in this house. The crying stopped. I sat perfectly still, one hand on the book, the other gripping the edge of the mattress. I did not know what word she meant. I did not know why nobody had knocked on my door. After a while, the voices faded. A cabinet closed. Water ran in the kitchen sink. Then silence. Sometime after 1, I went downstairs for water. The foyer light had been left on, warm and yellow over the mirror. The silver lay, and Polly, too, tie. Lay, and completely empty, not one key. Not even Lacey's white leather keychain. 4 cars were still somewhere on that property. My father's truck, my mother's sedan, Lacey's coupe, my SUV, but the tray where every key was supposed to be held nothing at all. I stood there in my socks, holding an empty glass, feeling the house breathe around me, and did what that family had trained me to do. I noticed. I doubted myself. I stayed quiet. For years, I had survived my family by not making trouble out of things I could not prove. That night, I mistook that habit for wisdom. By morning, the news would give the word my mother would not let Lacey say. The word was hit and run. It came from the television in my mother's kitchen at 6:38 Saturday morning, spoken by a young anchor in a red blazer who looked too polished for the thing she was saying. A 72-year-old man named Arthur Bell had been struck on County Road 18 at approximately 11:48 p.m. He had been walking home from his evening shift at the public library. The driver did not stop. A milk delivery driver found him 26 minutes later in the gravel shoulder, half in the weeds, still breathing. I stood at the counter with the coffee pot in my hand and watched the screen without pouring. The anchor said Arthur had been taken to Mercy Regional with a shattered pelvis, 3 cracked ribs, and a head injury. She said investigators were looking for a dark SUV with front-end damage. Then she moved on to weekend weather, as if the world had not just split open in my mother's kitchen. Behind me, the house was too quiet. My father's study door had been closed since before 6, and I could hear his voice through the wood, low and controlled, the voice he used when a supplier missed a payment or a councilman needed reminding who had donated to whom. Lacey had not come down. My mother said she had a migraine, but she said it before anyone asked. I set the coffee pot down and went outside for my overnight bag. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold gravel. My SUV was parked at the far end of the driveway, but it was not where I had left it. I had backed in Friday evening, because I always backed in. Now it was nose first toward the garage, as if someone had returned in a hurry and stopped caring about habits that were not theirs. I walked around the front slowly. The right headlight housing had a crack through it, thin and white, like a vein under glass. There was a pale scrape along the bumper, and the panel around it was clean. Not clean like rain had touched it, clean like a hand had gone over it with pressure. The rest of the car still wore the faint dust from the highway. I put my fingers on the hood, then pulled them away. That was when I saw my mother. Belinda stood at the side of the garage in her nightgown with a cardigan pulled over it, holding one of her yellow kitchen towels. She looked small in the gray morning, but there was nothing small about the way she watched me. "Dust from the gravel road gets everywhere this time of year," she said. It had rained after midnight. Neither of us mentioned that. I looked at the towel in her hand. One corner was damp. One corner had a faint gray smear. My mother folded it inward before I could look too long. "Come inside, Mara," she said. "Your father wants to talk." Not "Are you all right?" Not "Did you hear the news?" Not even "Something happened." Just "Come inside." By the time I stepped back into the kitchen, Nolan Pierce was already there. His car had not been outside when I went upstairs. It was there now, parked crooked beside my father's truck. He sat at the island in yesterday's suit, his tie loosened just enough to look human, a legal pad in front of him and my mother's coffee in his hand. He had been there long enough to finish half the mug. That was the first thing that told me what kind of morning this was. They had not called a lawyer after they found out what happened. They had called a lawyer before they called me. Conrad came in from the hallway, phone still in his hand. He did not say good morning. He did not say Arthur Bell's name. Nolan did not either. They said, exposure. They said, timeline. They said, before the sheriff gets a narrative we can't correct. My mother stood by the sink, rinsing a cup that was already clean. Piece by piece, the night assembled itself in front of me. Lacey had taken keys from the tray. Lacey had taken my SUV because it was easiest to move. Lacey had been drinking since before dinner. Lacey had come back after midnight, crying hard enough for my mother to tell her not to say the word. And Arthur Bell had lain beside County Road 18 for 26 minutes, while my family stood in this house deciding what could be survived. Then Nolan slid a sheet of paper across the island. It was not addressed to the police yet. It was not signed. But the signature line already carried my full legal name. I read the first sentence twice. I became disoriented while driving on County Road 18. My mother came around the island and touched my arm. "Just listen first," she said. But I had already heard enough to know the first thing I needed to do was not argue. It was not touch the car. I did not say that out loud. I looked at the drafted statement, then at Nolan, then at my mother's hand resting on my sleeve like she was comforting me instead of measuring how much pressure it would take to make me bend. My father stood by the doorway, phone still in his hand, waiting for me to become useful. Lacey had not come down. That mattered too. In a family emergency, the person who needed saving was upstairs sleeping while the person they planned to sacrifice was being asked to sit at the island. "I need air," I said. Nolan started to speak, but my father lifted one hand. He thought I was shaken. He thought shaken meant soft. I walked through the back door and onto the porch, where the cold hit my face hard enough to steady me. My hands were not trembling. That surprised me. Somewhere beneath the anger, beneath the hurt, a cleaner part of me had gone quiet. I took out my phone and called Talia Monroe. Talia answered on the third ring with no greeting, just, Mara? We had worked together years ago, before I moved into federal work, back when both of us still believed exhaustion was a personality trait. I told her everything in short pieces. The tray, the engine, the news, the crack in the headlight, the towel, the drafted statement. She did not interrupt once. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Have you spoken to police? No. Have you touched the vehicle? Only the hood. Are you alone with any of them now? Not anymore. Good, she said. Then listen carefully. From this point forward, your best move is boring, and boring is what survives court. Do not touch the car, do not argue with Nolan, do not explain your job, do not warn them about what that vehicle may have recorded. Preserve everything, and let them keep thinking you are scared. I looked across the yard at my SUV, sitting wrong in the driveway, its cracked headlight catching the gray morning. I can see the seat through the window, I said. It's too far forward. Talia went quiet for half a second. How much? Enough that I would notice. I did not open the door. I did not take photographs from inside. I did not pull data from the screen, even though every instinct in me wanted to. People think evidence is truth. It is not. Evidence is truth that has to survive other people trying to kill it. So I stood 10 feet from my own car and used the flattest customer service voice I owned to call my insurance company. I told them my vehicle may have been involved in an incident while in the possession of a driver I had not authorized, that liability was unclear, and that I wanted a claim opened immediately with a preservation hold. It took 14 minutes. 14 dull, beautiful minutes. The adjuster asked me to repeat the address twice, then told me the vehicle was not to be moved, repaired, cleaned, inspected by a private shop, or altered until their field investigator reviewed it. I thanked her so calmly she probably thought I was calling about hail damage. When I hung up, I could see my father watching me through the kitchen window. He did not know what I had done. That was the first mercy I gave myself that morning. When I went back inside, Nolan was still at the island, tapping his pen against the legal pad. Ready to talk like adults? He asked. I looked at the statement. I looked at the coffee ring beside it. I looked at my mother, who had folded the yellow towel into a neat square and placed it near the sink, as if neatness had ever made a thing clean. Not yet, I said. I need to understand the timeline first. Nolan smiled. That is what we are helping you with. And for the first time that morning, I almost smiled back, because I had just found the edge of the lie. What I did not know was how far my family was willing to go to keep me standing on the wrong side of it. Saturday passed in polite silence, which was how my family punished people before they punished them officially. No one raised their voice. No one slammed a door. My mother served lunch and asked if I wanted iced tea, as if she had not stood in the garage with a damp towel hours earlier. My father took calls in his study. Lacey stayed upstairs. Nolan left afternoon and came back Sunday morning with a fresh folder. By Sunday, they stopped pretending it was a misunderstanding. They moved the conversation from the kitchen to the dining room, which told me they wanted a stage, not a discussion. My father closed the pocket doors. My mother brought coffee. Nobody drank. Lacey finally came downstairs in a soft gray sweatshirt, her hair wet from a shower, looking less like a woman who had left a man on the roadside and more like a daughter everyone had agreed to protect. Nolan placed the news statement in front of me and turned it so the signature line faced my chair. We've adjusted the language, he said. No one is asking you to say anything dramatic. I read the first paragraph. This version no longer said I had been driving for certain. It said I had allowed Lacey access to my vehicle after observing she had consumed alcohol, and that I later became uncertain about who drove. It was a trap with 2 doors. If I refused to be the driver, they would make me the person who handed over the keys. My father leaned back, like this was a dealership negotiation. 5 o'clock Monday, he said. After that, we stop being able to protect you from the version other people choose. Protect me. That was the word he used while placing me closer to a felony. Lacey looked at me then, not angry, not sorry, tired. "Mara," she said, "you're stronger than me. You can survive people thinking badly of you. I can't. I've worked too hard." A 72-year-old man was in a hospital bed with metal holding his pelvis together, and my sister was talking about her reputation, like it was the body bleeding on the shoulder of County Road 18. Then my mother did the thing I was least prepared for. She brought out the old green photo album and set it beside the statement. Inside was a picture of me at 9, missing a front tooth, holding a calico cat on the front steps. I had forgotten that cat. I had not forgotten the girl. Belinda touched the corner of the photograph with one careful finger. "You think I don't know what you want?" she asked softly. "You want to come home and not feel like a guest." I looked at the picture longer than I should have. That was the dangerous part. Not Nolan's paper. Not my father's deadline. The dangerous part was that some small, tired piece of me still wanted what she was selling. Sunday dinners. My name spoken without disappointment. A place on the wall that did not stop 12 years ago. My mother knew exactly where the wound was because she had helped keep it open. "Sign this," she said. "And we stop making you one." For a second, no one moved. Even Nolan had the sense to look down. I heard the refrigerator hum, the clock over the buffet tick, Lacey breathing through her nose like she was the one being asked to give something up. I folded the copy Nolan had pushed toward me once, then again, and put it in my purse. "I'm not signing today," I said. My father's face closed. "Then don't expect this family to keep remembering you as one of ours." Belinda did not correct him. Lacey did not look away. I walked upstairs, packed one bag, and left for the Briar Glen Motor Lodge, with the copied statement in my purse and the album photo still burning behind my eyes. They thought they had cornered me. What they had done was put their lie in writing. The Briar Glen Motor Lodge sat behind a closed gas station and a billboard for crop insurance, the kind of place where every door opened directly to the parking lot and every curtain had been washed so many times it had given up on color. I checked into room 12 with one overnight bag, one copied statement, and the feeling that I had not left my parents' house so much as been pushed out of the version of it they still wanted me to believe in. Talia arrived just after 4, carrying a canvas briefcase and wearing the expression of a woman who had spent her career believing panic was a luxury. She read the statement at the little round table by the window, then she read it again, slower. "They changed the theory," she said. "First you were the driver, now you're the access point." I nodded. "If one door fails, they use the other." Talia looked up. "That means they know the first story has a problem." By Monday morning, she had found someone who understood cars better than families understand shame. His name was Malcolm Keene, 61, a former insurance investigator with a gray beard, square hands, and no interest in being impressed by anyone's last name. We met him at the secured lot behind my insurance company's regional field office, 20 minutes outside Briar Glen. Not at my parents' driveway, not in a repair shop Nolan could call, and not anywhere Conrad Whitcomb could walk in and shake a hand. Malcolm recorded everything before he touched the SUV. Date, time, weather, odometer, vehicle identification number. He photographed the cracked headlight, the pale scrape, the clean patch on the bumper, the seat rails, the floor mat, the steering wheel, the screen. Talia stood beside him, narrating chain of custody in a voice so calm, it made the whole thing feel less like rescue and more like gravity finally doing its job. The first thing the car gave us was the seat memory. At 11:39 p.m., the driver's seat had moved forward, 4.8 inches, and tilted slightly higher. I am 5'8". Lacey is 5'3" on a good day, and has never driven anything without pulling the seat close enough to hug the wheel. Malcolm did not smile when he read it. He just marked the time on his clipboard and said, "That's one." The second thing was the Bluetooth log. Lacey's iPhone connected at 11:41 p.m. and disconnected at 12:08 a.m. The third was the route history, still stored because the vehicle had been preserved before anyone got the chance to wipe or reset it. County Road 18 appeared like a line drawn through a lie. At 11, 48. The event recorder had captured hard braking, impact force, throttle release, and steering correction. 5 seconds before, 5 seconds after. The car had remembered what my family wanted me to forget. I thought I would feel triumphant. I did not. I stood in that cold lot while Malcolm sealed the data pull in an evidence bag, and all I could think about was Arthur Bell lying in the gravel for 26 minutes while my sister drove home. Evidence can clear your name. It cannot make the thing that happened less ugly. Talia found Owen Rusk by checking what Nolan had counted on everyone ignoring, the small businesses between my parents' road and County Road 18. Owen owned a watch repair shop 2 miles from the Whitcomb house, a narrow brick place with old clocks in the window and a security camera pointed toward the county intersection. He had footage of my SUV passing at 11:42 and returning at 12:09. He also had a voicemail from Nolan Pierce telling him not to insert himself into a family matter. Owen played it once, then put his phone face down. "I'm too old," he said, "to be scared of men who wear expensive shoes indoors." By the time we left his shop, the copied statement in my purse was no longer just an insult. The car, the camera, the voicemail, the times, the seat, the phone, they were starting to speak to each other. And the story they told was worse than I had let myself believe. My family had not only tried to save Lacey, they had started building a second crime around me. By Tuesday, Nolan Pierce changed his tone, because people only become formal when they realize friendly pressure has stopped working. The letter arrived at the motel front desk in a white envelope with my full name typed across the center. No text from my mother. No call from my father. Just paper, because paper had become their favorite way to pretend cruelty was procedure. Nolan warned that any conduct that could be construed as interfering with matters under county review could expose me to civil liability and professional consequences. He did not name my profession. That told me they still did not know. He only described me as a government employee with clerical proximity to legal systems, which was so condescending, I almost laughed. Talia read the letter standing by the motel window, then passed it back to me. "He's scared," she said. "Men like Nolan don't threaten people who aren't touching the right nerve." I folded the letter and placed it with the copied statement, not because it hurt me, but because it belonged with the rest of the pattern. That afternoon, we drove to Mercy Regional. I did not go into Arthur Bell's room. That would have been wrong, and I knew it. June agreed to speak only after Talia made clear we were not there to pressure her. She met us in the family waiting area, while I stood near the vending machines and watched a woman in her 70s hold a paper cup of coffee with both hands, because one hand was not enough anymore. June had taught second grade for 38 years. She had the kind of voice that made even bad news stand up straight. When June came out, she looked at me for a long moment. "He remembers something blue on the driver's wrist," she said. "A bracelet, maybe. He keeps saying blue when he wakes up." My throat tightened before I could stop it. Lacey's campaign bracelet had been blue and silver. She had worn it at dinner, raising her glass under the chandelier, while everyone applauded her clean judgment. I did not say that to June. I only nodded, because some truths should not be dropped on a wife in a hospital hallway. We spent the next 3 hours turning fear into exhibits. By evening, Talia had drafted the affidavit, not a speech, not revenge. A careful document requesting that the county attorney recuse his office and that a special prosecutor review the matter because of Conrad's local relationships, Nolan's involvement, and the attempt to redirect blame through written statements. We attached the preservation notice, Malcolm's preliminary report, Owen's footage log, Nolan's voicemail transcript, and the letter he had sent to the motel. I signed at 8:17 p.m. with the cheapest motel pen I had ever held. My family was probably eating dinner in that dining room, telling themselves I had gone quiet because I was scared. In a way, I was. I was scared of what truth would cost. But I was more scared of becoming the kind of woman who let an old man's broken body become a footnote in her sister's campaign. That night, for the first time, I stopped hoping my family would choose right. I prepared for what would happen when they did not. The affidavit did not make the house explode. That was what surprised me. I had expected shouting, doors opening, phones ringing until they blurred together. Instead, Wednesday passed with no word from anyone. No message from my mother asking where I was. No warning from my father. No wounded voicemail from Lacey. Silence, I learned, can be its own kind of strategy. It gives guilty people time to decide which mask still fits. On Thursday morning, Talia called and told me the county attorney had agreed to step back pending review. There will be a preliminary conference at 3, she said. You should be there, but you should not speak unless asked. Then she paused. Mara, they may bring the family version. I looked at the motel mirror, at the same face my parents had spent 37 years misunderstanding. Good, I said. Let them bring all of it. The conference was held in a small municipal office above the clerk's department, not a courtroom, which somehow made it worse. Courtrooms are built for consequences. Offices are built for people pretending consequences are still negotiable. My father arrived first with Nolan beside him. Belinda came next, wearing navy and pearls like grief had a dress code. Lacey walked in last, pale but powdered, her campaign bracelet missing from her wrist. Nolan placed 3 documents on the table. 3 versions. In the first, I had been the driver. In the second, I had handed Lacey the keys. In the third, written after his letter to the motel, I had become emotionally unstable and confused by family conflict. He said it gently, as if accusing me of losing my mind was an act of mercy. My mother stared at the table. My father stared at me. The special prosecutor, a woman named Denise Calder, read without changing expression. Then she asked me one question. Miss Whitcomb, did you authorize anyone to drive your vehicle that night? I could feel Nolan watching for hesitation. I could feel Lacey holding her breath. No, I said, and I did not know it had been taken until the next morning. Nolan leaned forward. With respect, this family is under enormous stress. Mara has always had a complicated relationship with her place in it. There it was, not evidence. Biography, sharpened into a knife. My father gave a small nod, the kind he used when a salesman had made a point worth keeping. Belinda's eyes filled, perfectly timed. Lacey looked down at her bare wrist. Denise Calder turned one page. Then we will be preserving all drafts, communications, vehicle data, security footage, and any items worn by potential drivers that evening. Nolan's pen stopped moving. For the first time since I was a child, I saw my father fail to control his face. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Fear does not always shout. Sometimes it is just a man realizing the room has rules he did not write. I did not tell them what Malcolm had found. I did not mention Owen. I did not say bracelet. I only sat with my hands folded and watched my family understand that the paper they kept pushing toward me had become evidence against them. When the conference ended, my mother touched my elbow near the door. You could still stop this, she whispered. I looked at her hand until she removed it. No, I said. I could have stopped lying for you years ago. I'm only doing it now. The hearing happened 9 days later, in a county courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old paper. Arthur Bell was still in the hospital. June sat in the second row, with her hands folded around a tissue she never used. My parents sat across the aisle from her, dressed like people attending a respectable inconvenience. Lacey stared straight ahead. Nolan kept his briefcase on the table, one hand resting on it, as if leather could protect him from facts. Denise Calder did not perform. That was what made her terrifying. She entered the evidence in clean, ordinary language. Vehicle preservation notice. Insurance custody record. Malcolm Keene's extraction report. Seat memory, at 11:39 p.m. Bluetooth connection from Lacey's phone at 11:41. Route history toward County Road, 18. Event data at 11:48. Return footage at 12:09 from Owen Rusk's camera. Nolan's voicemail warning Owen not to insert himself into a family matter. Each timestamp landed quietly, and each one took something from my family. My father lost the story first. I saw it in his jaw, the way it tightened when Denise placed the 3 drafts beside each other. My mother lost the performance next. Her eyes kept moving from the papers to Lacey's empty wrist. Lacey lost the room when June Bell stood just long enough to identify the bracelet from a photograph taken at the anniversary dinner. It was blue and silver. It was campaign merchandise. It was supposed to mean service. In that courtroom, it meant a 72-year-old man had remembered the last flash of color before impact. Lacey made a sound then, small and furious, like a child being caught with something breakable in her hand. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. Nolan reached toward her sleeve, but Denise looked at him once, and his hand stopped halfway. Then Nolan tried the final version of me. "Miss Whitcomb has overstated her competence in this matter," he said. "She is a clerical government employee with personal resentment toward her family." Denise turned to me. "For the record, Miss Whitcomb, please, state your occupation." The room became so still I could hear the court reporter's keys stop. I looked at my father first, because he had been the one who named me small for so long. "My name is Mara Whitcomb," I said, "and I am an assistant United States attorney for the District of Colorado." My mother closed her eyes. My father stared as if the sentence had been spoken in another language. Lacey turned toward me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not guilt, not grief. Recognition. She had spent her whole life believing I was harmless because that was the version of me our parents had given her. The judge did not gasp. Real rooms rarely do. But the air changed. Nolan's face went the color of paper left in rain. Denise asked no more questions than she needed. She did not have to. The documents, the car, the camera, the phone, the bracelet, and the drafts had already done the speaking. Truth, I learned that day, does not need volume when it has timestamps. Lacey did not walk out of that courtroom in handcuffs that day. Real consequences rarely arrive with the timing people expect. They came slowly, through filings, interviews, amended statements, and the kind of quiet phone calls that make important men suddenly unavailable. 3 weeks later, she withdrew from the city council race for health and family reasons. 6 weeks after that, she accepted a plea that included leaving the scene of an injury accident and making false statements. Her campaign website disappeared before Christmas. Nolan Pierce's name became attached to an ethics complaint, and then to a bar investigation. People in Briar Glen stopped saying he was brilliant, and started saying they had always thought he was too slick. My father's dealership did not close, but contracts he had counted on began drifting elsewhere. Men who once laughed too loudly at his stories stopped returning calls. Conrad Whitcomb had built his life on being the man who knew everyone. He had never considered what would happen when everyone knew him back. My mother called me once in January. I almost let it go to voicemail, but there are some wounds you answer just to prove they no longer own your hands. She did not apologize. Not really. She said the house felt different. She said Lacey was not herself. She said my father barely slept. Then she asked if I understood that she had only been trying to keep the family from breaking apart. I looked around my Denver apartment while she spoke. There were no anniversary photos on my walls. No silver trays. No old rules pretending to be love. "Mom," I said, "the family broke when you decided Arthur Bell mattered less than Lacey's future. I just stopped helping you hide the crack." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You sound so hard." I thought of the girl in the photo album, the one still waiting to be chosen. "No," I said. "I sound awake." Arthur Bell survived, though survival was not the same as returning to the life he had before. He used a walker for months. June sent me one card in the spring, written in careful teacher handwriting. She thanked me for not letting the truth become another thing taken from him. I kept that card in my desk, not because I needed forgiveness, but because I needed to remember what the fight had actually been for. People ask whether I miss my family. The honest answer is yes, but not the family I had. I miss the one I kept inventing to survive them. I miss the mother who might have protected both her daughters from becoming cruel. I miss the father who might have been proud without needing one child to stand smaller beside the other. Missing that does not mean I want to go back. For years, I thought being loved meant being useful enough not to abandon. Then my family handed me a confession and called it loyalty. They gave me a choice between belonging and truth, and for the first time in my life, I chose the one that did not require me to disappear. That is not forgiveness, it is not revenge either. It is freedom, and freedom is quieter than people think. There are stories that end with a verdict, and there are stories that end with a person finally learning how to stand inside her own life. Mara's story was never only about a car, a statement, or a courtroom. It was about the quiet danger of being trained to believe that love must be earned by sacrifice, silence, and usefulness. Many people grow up in families where loyalty is treated like obedience. They are told to keep peace, protect the family name, forgive quickly, stay small, and never embarrass the people who hurt them. Over time, they begin to mistake survival for love. They tell themselves that if they can just be patient enough, useful enough, forgiving enough, then one day the family will finally see them. But real love does not ask you to disappear. Real family does not demand that one child carry the consequences of another child's choices. Real loyalty does not mean lying for someone who harmed another human being, and forgiveness should never be used as a weapon to make the victim clean up the damage caused by the guilty. The hardest lesson Mara learned was that choosing the truth may cost you the version of family you kept hoping for. But sometimes, that version was only a dream you built to survive what they refused to give you. Walking away from manipulation is not cold. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Refusing to be used is not selfish. Sometimes, it is the first honest act of self-respect a person has ever allowed themselves. Healing does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like sleeping peacefully in a small apartment where no one controls the keys. Sometimes it looks like answering the phone without shaking. Sometimes it looks like missing people and still knowing you cannot go back. That is resilience, not becoming untouched by pain, but refusing to let pain turn you into someone else's shield. So, if this story touched something in you, remember this. You are allowed to love your family and still choose the truth. You are allowed to miss them and still protect yourself. You are allowed to stop carrying blame that was never yours. If you believe Mara made the right choice, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own family asked you to sacrifice your life to protect their lie?